Kendall, please, just before the motion.
Hi. Right. Okay, let's get started. Now, I think a lot has gone wrong already in terms of the opposition's case. I'm going to start the first part of my speech by explaining to you guys just where I think that man in particular just like sort of tied his own noose in terms of hanging their case. And then I'm going to go on to talk to you guys about three things. We're going to go on a little world tour. We're going to start in a place called Singapore, and we're going to discuss why small places are run more efficiently, and why that means that we should all choose to have an independent London. Next, we're going to go to places like New York and Hanover. We're going to go on a little world tour. We're going to discuss the league of international huge cities that compete with each other all the time. We're going to discuss why we should all vote to be independent, because otherwise we're going to fall behind. And finally, we're going to come back to jolly old England. We're going to come back to those people who live in like green bits beyond Watford that I don't really understand. And we're going to discuss why it's specifically, this is necessary for them, why specifically this is a win-win. But first of all, I'm going to go back to the points raised in that gentleman's speech. And I think the most important thing that happened was that Lewis asked him what were his criteria for having an independent area or an independent state. And he said, in amongst other things, well, it should be self-sufficient and it should have the popular will. Well, the second one, first of all, like, we don't have the popular momentum yet because that's why we're having this debate. We want to convince you guys. He can't say that you haven't been convinced because you haven't been convinced. Listen to us. We'll show you why this is the best choice for all of us in this room. And second of all, we want to talk about this whole self-sufficiency thing, because he said, well, like, London doesn't have enough space for sheep, so there'll be no more kebabs. England, United Kingdom isn't food self-sufficient. Like, hardly anywhere in Europe is nowadays. No thanks. So instead, we do a thing called importing food. We do a thing called importing food, because we exist in something called the world economy that apparently they haven't heard of. And the other thing I want to say, I want to deal with this idea right off, that somehow Samir said that the rest of the country invested in us. And I'm going to come back to that at the end of my speech. But before I do that, I want to admit something. My partner did some research. She actually knows some facts about this. One of the facts she knows is that sustaining the rest of the British economy from the central tax pool, sustaining the bits of this country right now that are running themselves in a way that isn't economically competitive, costs about £200 billion a year. Now, some of that is debt, and a lot of that is tax on this city. A lot of that is money that should be being spent on improving this city, that should be being spent on solving all the problems that you have to deal with every single day. And that's why I want to get on now to my first point about Singapore, and why that unlike goal difference, when it comes to political governments, small is better. We think that actually, when you come from a place, you understand how to solve its problems. That's what our second speaker told you. She told you that London faces a lot of unique challenges. But more than that, when you have more people per representative voting to select them into places like this building, when you have all of us coming together, drowning out the white noise of Leeds and Southampton, what you have is a way of solving these problems properly. Because what you have is the money that we've generated to solve the problems that we face on a much more efficiently distributed level. Like, we would still definitely keep Brixton, because we think that there are fantastic things that are going to happen there, because we understand how to improve it. We don't expect people in Southampton to get those challenges. We don't really understand what's going on in Southampton ourselves. I don't really know where it is. I don't think I should have to find out. I think that when you look at other independent cities in the world, because they do exist, we're not just talking about being in a league with Malta. We're talking about being in a league with places like Singapore, where they are run ridiculously successfully, where they are clean, where they are progressive, where every car on the road is less than 10 years old. If we temper that with some democracy, we think we'll be getting a fantastic place to live. Those of you who understand more about Singapore will understand that. This second point I want to move on to very quickly. The league of the world, and why London is falling behind. We compete every single day to keep those bankers here. We compete with places like New York, and we've got so much more in common with them in solving our problems and in eating Krispy Kreme donuts, that we think that if we actually allow ourselves to fall behind, then we're stopping ourselves from being the real world leader that we should be. Because if we cut off this £200 billion of wasted spending, if we spent it on improving ourselves and making ourselves attractive, we could have so much more than London generates right now, and we could spend that on each other. We can spend that on improving this place. It's already great. Let's make it fantastic. Let's win that competition. And to move on to this final point now, about sustainable England, because that's not what we see right now. What we see is a bloated England that can literally turn around to London and be like, I want to run a shipyard, can you give me some money? That's not being done competitively. Those places need to reboot themselves. They need to change their economies. Yes, that means some pain. We've conceded that. But what we're looking to is a future where they fall even further behind. We lose this contest with New York and Hanover and Switzerland and all these places where there is a fantastic financial economy, but more than that, the rest of England is losing its race as well. The rest of England isn't doing manufacturing properly. The rest of England can rely on state subsidies from us. We don't think that's just. Like, for the very simple reasons that we know that small is better, that we know that we have the potential to win this competition between cities, and because we know that England needs to improve itself with some kind of incentive, we beg to propose.